Welcome to the Humorism Evening Podcast, the official podcast of the Humorism newsletter. I'm your host, Seth Simons, author of the Humorism newsletter. It is Sunday, May 17th, a little before 7 p.m. here in Brooklyn, New York, where it's hot. It's a hot night in Brooklyn after a hot day in Brooklyn. This past week on the Humorism newsletter, we covered the bleak and racist spectacle of the Roast of Kevin Hart at the Netflix Is a Joke Festival. We looked at Shane Gillis's extensive history of, uh, actually, I wouldn't actually call it extensive. It's not really that extensive, it's just 4 times, but more than you would like a person to do it. Anyways, his history of downplaying the Epstein scandal. We discussed a few things I've watched and enjoyed recently, such as a new special by Megan Gailey and a new funny video by Jack Bensinger. And then, of course, we learned about Theo Von saying the N-word at the Netflix Is a Joke Festival. Just straight up saying the one word everyone agrees is so racist that you just do not say it as a white person. Well, that's the word he came out and said, and people cheered for it. They cheered and applauded. They loved it. They had an amazing time. The newspaper was there. The newspaper didn't say anything about it. Life went on. It just sort of happened. And that's what we talked about on the Humorism newsletter this week. Before we get into what I'd like to get into tonight, let me just say thank you to everyone who tuned in last week to Humorism Evening Podcast number 001. This is number 002. As you can see, I am setting some expectations for myself with the number of digits in the title. I'm being aspirational. But no, thank you for writing in. Thank you for sending me your thoughts, your replies, your general remarks. And I'd just also like to add at the beginning here, I do depend on word of mouth to grow this newsletter and, of course, this podcast. If you ever feel so moved, please go ahead and share it with your friends, your colleagues, your professional associates and loved ones. I appreciate every little bit. Thank you retrospectively and in advance. Just a blanket thank you to everybody. All right, here's what I would like to get into tonight. It's an article in the Wall Street Journal. We all know and love the Wall Street Journal, a Murdoch paper. They do good work over there. They do fine work at the Wall Street Journal. I'll put a gift link to the article in the email version of this podcast. Here's the headline, as we like to call it in journalism. The title of the article, it goes like this. Actually, I have to switch tabs. Here it is. Okay, here's what we call the title of the article. America's favorite comedian wants to be the next Walt Disney, and he's not joking. And now we'll get into the first 2 paragraphs of the article now that we've read the headline. Okay, here we go. Nate Bargatze has a business plan so unheard of for a stand-up comedian that it sounds like the setup for a joke. He's planning to build a theme park emblazoned with his name, Nateland, in his hometown of Nashville, Tennessee, with roller coasters, live shows, restaurants, the works. It's expected to cover more than 100 acres and cost about $350 million. A grand ambition for a guy who jokes about being slow on the uptake. Yeah, so it's this article about Nate Bargatze, the clean comic, you know him, the family-friendly, apolitical guy, the guy you get a beer with, who's building a $350 million theme park that he's gonna name after himself. That's what's happening here. That's the big news. I will confess up front with you that I've never been accused of being the greatest Nate Bargatze fan in the world. No one has ever accused me of that. I have not watched his specials. I've watched some of his clips, but I have not watched his specials. I have a little rule that I like to go by. I say that if you are ever on the Legion of Skanks podcast, or if you go on what's called Skankfest, or Skankfest Vegas, or Skankfest South, or Skankfest New Orleans, then I don't really care about your artwork. Even if you are technically funny, it just doesn't matter to me. I don't care. I have seen his SNL episodes, some of them. He hosted twice. They did a George Washington sketch that everyone loved. It was pretty funny. I guess I enjoyed it. Um, but the thing about SNL is that it's kind of their job to make you look good if you're the host. So if you're the host and you look good, well, I mean, I kind of don't give you much credit for that, if I'm being honest. I don't give you too much credit for that. All right, let's read a little bit deeper into the article about Nate Bargatze building a theme park and naming it after himself. Okay, here's what the article says next. Good, clean, funny is the tagline for Nate Bargatze's company, Nateland Entertainment. It has grown to include a podcast network, a four-night comedy cruise, and content from a roster of clean comics. He's the host of an ABC game show, The Greatest Average American, and stars in The Breadwinner, his first theatrical movie out this month. He pictures the theme park as the culmination of these ventures, a home base for his ideas, and a haven of family experiences. With Nateland, he wants to be a Tennessee Walt Disney, except he'll also function as a mascot. Quote, I'm the Mickey Mouse, he says. I'll say that last bit again. With Nateland, he wants to be a Tennessee Walt Disney, except he'll also function as a mascot. I'm the Mickey Mouse, he says. I think that's just amazing. I mean, I think that's just great. I think it's really cool how comedians, they're either Nazis or they're friends with Nazis, or they sold their soul to Lorne Michaels, or they want to be the next Walt Disney and they're friends with Nazis. I just think it's really cool that this turns out to be a new form of insanity that I would not have expected from a comedian based on all the previous forms of insanity that we've seen and discussed. I guess the obvious reference points are Joe Rogan starting his own little Nazi utopia in Austin, and Dave Chappelle starting his comparable utopia in Yellow Springs, Ohio, where he's bought up a bunch of real estate, opened his own club, bought a schoolhouse and restored it and leased it to a radio station. I believe I just saw a news item that he opened up a merch shop. He opened up a merch shop for Dave Chappelle themed merch, where you can buy the same merch that he seems to wear all the time. You can buy it and be just like Dave Chappelle. But yeah, those are the guys who, and they're all worth like $500 million themselves or more, I don't know. And they're starting with that money their own little creative ecosystems where they can rule as kings. But Nate Bargatze, his big idea is to start a theme park based on himself, and as we'll learn in the article, loosely adapting some of his material into experiences. I guess when I say it like that, it doesn't seem as bad as the other guys. It's definitely, I mean, it's not as bad as creating a little Nazi utopia in Austin, Texas. I just can't take you seriously as an artist if you're doing that. And it kind of seems like he doesn't want to be taken seriously as an artist anyways. There's a bit in here in this article where he says something to the effect of, I'm in the ticket selling business. That's all I've ever been in. Okay, man, you don't, are you in comedy because you have stuff to say? Do you have ideas you want to express? No, I guess you don't. You're in it to sell tickets. Okay, there's another bit where, actually, it's not him, it's one of his business partners who says that all he's ever wanted is to create the biggest audience possible, which is why he does clean comedy and inoffensive, family-friendly comedy. He wants the biggest audience possible. Yeah, man, you and everybody else. Let's see. Okay, here's a funny bit, a funny little sentence about his new movie Breadwinner. It goes like this. Major brands featured in The Breadwinner include Toyota, Walmart, and the Tennessee Titans, with significant roles in the plot. You hear that? His movie has brands in it. It's got Walmart. Walmart features in the movie. That's awesome. Let's read a little bit more into the article about Nateland. The still evolving design for Nateland is divided into three sections based on the comedian's roots in Tennessee, his career journey to New York, and his expanding reach in the world beyond. Visitors would enter through a 1990s style mall. The area, based on Bargatze's local lore, would include coasters, and a donkey dive ride inspired by one of his jokes. That actually reminds me of the and I didn't look up how to pronounce his name since I couldn't pronounce it last week. But Bert Kreischer or Creature, Bert. We all know Bert and find him to be odious. You know his movie, based on one of his jokes, The Machine. That whole movie he made based on his joke, which, if I recall, was a smash hit of a movie. Everyone loved it. Everyone's talking about it. It brought back the studio comedy. And now Nate Bargatze is doing his own version of that, which is a ride inspired by one of his jokes. Okay, the article goes on to say the New York section would have street performers, live shows, and a ride through a simulated Times Square with a New Year's Eve ball drop. I love that. You can take your family to a taste of New York City right there in Nashville, Tennessee. The third section would have stunt performances and interactive shows. All right, I guess I don't have much to say about that last bit. Stunt performances and interactive shows. You remember that is the third section based on his expanding reach in the world beyond. Sounds kind of sci-fi. Hopefully they do something a little more high concept with that. Anyways, not a lot of ideas. You know, it's his haven for his ideas, and those ideas basically seem to be nostalgia for the 1990s and New York City. All right, let's keep chugging along with the article. For the next bit I'm about to read to make sense, you need the context that Nateland will be applying for various tax incentives and subsidies from the state of Tennessee. Okay, here's the paragraph I'm going to read now. To Bargatze and his backers, the selling points for Nateland go beyond tourism and economics. Quote, the projects we incentivize have to fit this heartland, middle America approach to things, end quote, says Tennessee Deputy Governor Stuart McWhorter. Quote, what Nate represents aligns with our state, end quote. I love that. I love that too. I think that's great. I personally love it when the deputy governor of a state that just gerrymandered the hell out of its only majority black congressional district says that what I represent aligns with his state. I think that's cool and it reflects well on me, and it speaks highly of what I'm for. What does Nate Bargatze represent that aligns so much with Tennessee, I wonder? I wonder that. I guess it's just being inoffensive and being clean and being family friendly. I'm certain some families more than others. He's friendly to them. Not all families, but certain ones, certain types of families is what he's friendly to. I mean, that's sort of the whole thing here with Nate Bargatze, and it's obviously sort of a cliche at this point to say that a political comedy is actually, oh my God, political. But if this thing comes to fruition, this theme park, and I think I'll be surprised if it does. I kind of don't think it's going to. If you were to put a gun to my head and say, Seth, do you think it's going to come to fruition? Tell me, or I will shoot you in the head. I would probably say no, I don't think it's going to. But if it does come to fruition, it'll just be a huge testament to the grift that these apolitical comedians who, by the way, appear on Skankfest and are friends with some of the biggest Nazis in the industry, it'll be just a huge testament to the grift they're pulling off when they say they don't believe in anything. Now here's the most amazing part of the article to me, which is also the end of the article, so there won't be any more article after this. Pause for my dog drinking water. He's just having some water over there. We're in my apartment. It's where I live with my dog. I'll reveal his name in a future episode. That could be some incentive for you to keep listening, or you could follow me on Instagram at the Good Seth, where I do believe his name appears in many of the posts. He's drinking quite a bit. He doesn't care about me or what I'm doing. I basically am just some guy who he lives with, who feeds him. All right, he's done drinking, and now I'm going to read the next section of the article that I will read for you now, which goes like this. Bargatze's company still heavily relies on money from his stand-up shows. He wants to taper down his arena tours and hopes Nateland will switch up the transaction, with audiences coming to him. At the same time, Bargatze says there's something uncomfortable about building a park around himself. The comedy equivalent of Dollywood, Dolly Parton's theme park in Pigeon Forge, 200 miles to the east. Actually, I'll pause here to say, too, that the Humorism newsletter and the Humorism evening podcast has no qualm with Dollywood or Dolly Parton. There's the dog again. We here at Humorism are friends to Dolly. Back to the paragraph. It goes, Storyland Chief Creative Officer Mel McGowan says designers have gotten used to Bargatze's requests to dial back his presence in the attractions they're creating. One reason for that contradiction, the comic says, is his need to stay a relatable guy. Another factor, his religious faith, which tells him, quote, you should be second to God, second to your family, second to the community, the audience, end quote, he says. Quote, the win for me, he adds, I fucked up saying quote there, but the win for me, he adds, will be when people go to Nateland and maybe don't even know who Nate is. I think that's so special. First, the bit about basically erecting a huge monument to yourself and saying, well, I'm still second to God. And then just saying that I hope someday maybe people come here without even knowing who I am. You could just not name it after yourself. You could just not name it after yourself and not base it on your life and your comedy. You could just not be famous at all, actually, if that's what you want. There are a lot of shortcuts to the outcome you are describing. I like to call this comedy brain. Comedy brain it's an unfortunate condition, really, unique to comedians and other entertainers and some CEOs, really, in which their perception of how the world works is exactly backwards. They get it just completely 180 degrees turned around. The quintessential example for me is something I wrote about years ago in a review of Pete Holmes's Crashing. We all remember Crashing, the short-lived, not short enough though, HBO show featuring Pete Holmes as himself. And I wrote about an interview he did with Mike Birbiglia, I think, on his own podcast, where he was talking about why shows about comedians are necessary and important, or maybe not exactly that, but just why they're worthwhile. And his argument was basically that, well, it wasn't basically this. I'm about to quote it directly. He said, "Why comedians? Here's why, in my opinion. One, they have a believable reason to be funny. Even if your wife is leaving you, you'd be making some jokes, so that helps us. Two, no matter what your dream is, everybody's hope out of existence is to have their insides, their thoughts and their feelings brought outside and be celebrated. So the plight of the comedian is the plight of everybody." End quote. And like I said, exactly backwards. No, everybody has a believable reason to be funny because everybody is funny. People are funny. Human beings are funny. They all contain the capacity for funny, even in the darkest times when their wives are leaving them. And everyone has the capacity to plumb out their insides, to bring them out and to have them be celebrated. The plight of everybody is the plight of everybody. You're not special because you are a comedian. You just think you are because you have subjected yourself to a life of being constantly affirmed by thousands and tens of thousands and even millions of people, which has fucked up your head tremendously in ways you are precisely incapable of realizing because you fucked it up so badly. And I do realize that what I'm calling comedy brain is just regular narcissism. But I do think it is a useful framework, and once you see it in one comedian, you'll see it in so many others, or really all of them, except for the ones I like and the ones who subscribe to the Humorism newsletter. Anyways, Nateland, take your family to a mock Times Square. It's just like regular Times Square, but it's clean and family friendly and inoffensive. Wink, wink. Nobody will be offended. It's got all the types of people who none of them are going to be offended. It's in Tennessee. It's in Nashville. It's Nateland. You can see some stunts and you can see some clean comedy. I think that's going to be good. I hope it happens. I uh, I just think it's funny that even the most straight-laced, normal, clean, apolitical, white bread stand-up guy turns out to be, shocker, a huge megalomaniac, so much so that he had the Wall Street Journal do a whole article about how he's building a monument to his megalomania, and he doesn't obviously seem to realize it at all. I don't know if the journalist does. Uh, they're good enough not to let you know, of course, over there at the Wall Street Journal, a Murdoch company. It's just pretty funny to me. Ha ha ha. I wonder if it'll happen. I'd probably go. I'd check it out. I'd see if I can get in for free. Probably not if this podcast is successful, so I'd have to choose what to be optimistic about, but we'll see. All right, I think that concludes the segment on Nateland. That's the final word. I have no more remarks on Nateland. If you have something you want to say about it, email in, send me a message. I love to hear from you. Let me know what you think of Nate Bargatze's big plan. We could dive back in future episodes. It could be fun. Could be boring. Either way, I guess that's pretty much all I've got for episode 2, episode 002. I'll just do a quick reflection here at the end of the episode. Could be better. Not bad, could be better. A couple areas for improvement I'm noticing while I'm doing it, and then also while I'm editing it and coming back and redoing certain bits. But not a shit show. I guess my main thing is I just don't see how people do this for hours at a time. That is completely incomprehensible to me. My respects to the people who do, unless they're evil, in which case they do not have my respects. In fact, I hope they suffer. I hope they suffer what they have wrought. But respects to the other ones. I hope you enjoyed listening. Thank you, of course, for doing so. And we'll tune back in next week. End of podcast.